In the world of Shadow Slave, an ordinary night's sleep can mark the beginning of an extraordinary nightmare. All across the globe, teenagers had been drifting off only to be thrust into a lethal trial, one that will either awaken supernatural power within them or claim their lives. This phenomenon is known as the nightmare spell. Yet, its true nature remains a mystery. Who or what is behind this spell, and might put humanity through such brutal trials? The answer lies buried in ancient lore and the trials of those who endured the spell's curse. And in today's video, we'll unravel the darkest mystery of Shadow Slave and see what truths lurk behind the spell's creation and purpose. The origin of the nightmare spell is steeped in myth and cosmic intrigue. It wasn't a natural phenomenon at all, but a created thing, forged by an ancient entity known as Weaver, whom the legends call the Demon of Fate. Weaver's domain was fate itself. He or it, I don't know what to call it, it could glimpse into the future threads of fate and reality, past, present, and future. And using those very threads of destiny, Weaver wove the nightmare spell as one would weave a tapestry. In essence, the spell is a construct made of fate. A piece of magic so profound that it doesn't follow ordinary cause and effect at all. This is why many say the spell is a causal, something truly outside the normal laws of nature. It's as if Weaver imbued the spell with a part of fate's own fabric, giving it almost sentient intuition about how events should unfold. Now, why would Weaver create such a thing? The prevailing understanding is that the nightmare spell was meant as humanity's salvation against an oncoming catastrophe. Eons ago, a great war between the gods and demons raged, threatening to annihilate everything. Weaver saw a future where mankind would be destroyed because of this cosmic war, and struck a plan to help. Thus, the nightmare spell was gifted to humans to prepare them for this doom. This means to grant ordinary people the means of awaken and climb the path of power, of ascension. By infecting young people and forcing them through brutal trials, the spell rapidly produced warriors with the strength needed to stand against harrowing threats. In other words, it was a weapon of fate designed to nurture heroes. Some even worshipped this gift, rather than praying to the absent gods or dread demons. In fact, an order of Weaver's followers built the Temple of the Nightmare Spell in honor of this miraculous boon, celebrating it as a tool humans could rely on, instead of fickle gods or demons. However, there is an even deeper layer to the spell's origin, a truth hinted at in the most recent revelations of the novel. So, spoiler ahead, don't read this until you're at least in chapter, 1800 or 2000, I don't remember the exact chapter. In the later chapters of Shadow Slave, Sunny and others begin to suspect that the nightmare spell's creation was tied to an act of desperation against a single terrifying enemy. The spell wasn't born from mortal fear at all. It was born because of the nightmare of a god. Long ago, against a lore known by many of this world, there were 7 instead of 6 gods, and the 7th god was called the Forgotten God. Now, why was it forgotten? Because the plane of existence, the reality that Shadow Slave story plays in, was being invaded by the Void. And in an attempt to seal the Void, the gods built a cage to seal it. And in the process of sealing the plane from the Void, the Forgotten God was trapped inside of it in the Void. And rather than endure that torment, it split itself into, 7 pieces, which led to the creation of the demons. And also the Forgotten God is also called the Dream God. So yeah. And that God is being corrupted by the Void. And that God is also slumbering, but threatened to break free into the world. In response, Weaver crafted the nightmare spell as a sort of cosmic lullaby, a sorcery that trapped the Forgotten God in an endless slumber, locking him inside a never-ending nightmare. And while that ancient god sleeps, his bad dreams leak his, nightmares and bad dreams leak out into reality, spawning nightmare gates, monstrous creatures, and a spreading corruption that slowly eats at the world. The spell's dual purpose then was monumental. It simultaneously imprisons this world-devouring entity and nurtures mortals to become powerful enough to resist and hopefully survive the spread of corruption. Hopefully, in the future, getting rid of it for good and slaying that god. Weaver wove the spell as both a chain and a sword, chaining the great enemy in sleep and sharpening humanity into a blade. This mythic origin makes the nightmare spell more than a survival game. It's a part of a grand plan to save all of existence from an unfathomable evil. Of course, most people in the story don't know this true purpose. It remains an elusive secret, one we readers piece together by lore. Now, let's go over the mechanics of the spell. Mechanically, the nightmare spell behaves like a cruel, sophisticated system built into the fabric of the world. It targets young people, usually from 15 to 18 years old, as its carriers, and the first sign of infection is an irresistible drowsiness. In fact, this is how Shadow Slave begins. A chosen teen will suddenly feel overwhelmingly sleepy, and when they finally succumb, they are transported into their first nightmare. In that moment, their body in the real world goes inert, almost like a coma, let's say, while their consciousness awakens in the dream realm, an alternate reality where the nightmare spells stages its trials. It's an amalgamation of worlds, let's say. Each person's first nightmare is a deadly scenario filled with monsters, dangers, and a central challenge that must be overcome to escape. These nightmares aren't random either. They often recreate events from ancient history in the dream realm, as if the spell is drawing on old legends to test the new generation. From the moment an infection hits, it's win or die. If the sleeper manages to complete the nightmare, the spell releases them, and with the power to boot. If they fail, they will never wake up at all, and they will spawn a nightmare gate. Survivors then of the first nightmare emerge back into reality as awakened humans. This means the spell has fundamentally changed them. Every awakened receives an aspect, which is a unique magical power or affinity, and a corresponding flaw, which is a curse or limitation that acts as the price of that power. For example, Sunny's case. His aspect lets him control shadows, but his flaw prohibits him from ever telling a lie. These powers and curses vary widely. The important thing is that the spell essentially unlocks a latent potential within the person. It turns some inner trait or talent into a supernatural ability. Along with this, the awakened gains access to their soul sea, an inner well of spiritual energy, or essence as you may call it, that they also can now perceive and use. Yes, an awakened can now utilize soul essence, which is basically the power currency of the world. They can also bring back treasures from the dream. The spell often awards victors with memories, which are magical items or weapons obtained within the nightmare. And sometimes, if you're lucky, echoes, which are like echoes of defeated nightmare creatures that can aid their masters. An awakened then can carry these boons into the real world, wielding enchanted weapons or summoning monsters, making them far more formidable than any normal human. And also it's cool to note that normal weapons don't damage nightmare monsters, so if they come into Earth through nightmare gates, only awakened and so on can fight them off. It's as if the spell were a bizarre RPG. Beat the dungeon, gain a level. Get your loot and special class abilities. The nightmare spell also functions as a guiding interface for those it infects. Upon awakening, people find that the spell provides a kind of special HUD, a heads-up display, that only they can see and hear. They receive status updates and notifications from the spell. Yes, for instance, when they gain a new ability, they automatically know how to use it, as if the information was downloaded into their brain, becoming instantly proficient with it. When they kill an enemy, the spell tells them you have slain said enemy, and also gives the lore and, if the enemy is unique enough, the backstory of the people they slayed, or monsters. The spell might communicate these things via floating runic text or a whisper only they can hear. Awakened see cryptic runes describing their stats or abilities, which are actually just an instrument the spell uses to convey information. Additionally, the spell takes care of practical barriers. It translates languages on the fly inside of nightmares. If people from different areas of the world or even eras are pulled into the same nightmare, they mysteriously understand each other, because the spell makes it so. This translation feature underscores the idea that the nightmare scenarios are orchestrated. Everyone gets a fair shot at cooperation or conflict without a language gap. In short, the spell isn't just throwing people into chaos blindly. It will never assign to you a nightmare that you cannot complete. It actively manages the experience, teaching Awaken how to use powers, informing them of the rules, and removing impediments like language difference. It's both a referee and a coach in the deadly game it immerses you in. Another crucial mechanic of the spell is how it handles travel between worlds and the progression of an Awaken's power. Initially, after the first nightmare, a person is of the lowest rank, often colloquially called a sleeper before they awaken. At this stage, they cannot enter the dream realm at will. They will only go there automatically whenever they fall asleep in the real world. Every time they sleep, their consciousness slips back into the dream realm, though not necessarily into a high-stakes nightmare trial each time. Sometimes it's just to wander or train, or whatever they're tethered to. As they grow stronger, the spell will prompt them into new nightmares. Typically, to reach the next major rank in power on the path of ascension, one must clear another nightmare challenge. That's the known progression after the first nightmare. There is the second nightmare to reach the next rank, then the third nightmare, and so on and so forth, up until the sixth nightmare, known as the highest rank. And with each ascension in rank, the Awakened gains more extraordinary abilities. For instance, by the time one becomes the Master, called rank 3, they can physically enter the dream realm at will, not just when sleeping. They leave their body behind with a sort of tether and cross over, body and all, into the dream world. Even higher, Saints, rank 4, are like walking gateways. They can come and go freely and even bring other people along with between the realms. And the top tier Awakened, the Sovereigns, rank 5 is the highest at the moment, actually carry a permanent gateway inside themselves, effectively blurring the line between reality and dream wherever they go. At those heights, an Awakened is so powerful they can ferry others into the dream or perhaps create new portals. And the higher they climb in rank, the bigger the calling to tackle other nightmares and to stay in the dream realm, hinting that the spell influences them to leave their native realm. And on another note, the nightmare spell acts as both a trainer and a test giver for Awakened. It's often said that, though cruel, the spell provides training wheels for Awakened, a structured, if brutal path to develop their powers quickly. Controlling essence, handling mystical items, using one's aspect abilities, all of this is made instinctual by the spell for the Awakened. Let's take Rain's gains, for example. She's not in the spell. She had to learn to control essence, spend a buttload of time just learning to go into her soul sea, let alone using aspect abilities and discovering what they were. So yeah, while dangerous, it makes things convenient. In a way, while it kills many people, it saves a lot of people. This is one reason humanity could survive the appearances of the spell at all, and the corruption. Teenagers with no combat experience suddenly find themselves able to handle weapons and wield powers effectively, as if guided by an unseen hand. The spell created a swift and streamlined road to greater power. It accelerates human evolution by forcing individuals through life and death crucibles. Survive, and you come out much stronger. Fail, you die. And there is no hiding from this. You cannot hide from the spell. It is coming for you. And if not the spell, then the corruption and nightmare gates are coming for you, so you have to pick one. And the spell further helps you with a hidden protective function. When someone overcomes their first nightmare, it's not just granting them power, it's also destroying a seed of darkness within them. Because each infected person carries a tiny bead of the nightmare's corruption in their soul. And the intense pressure of the first nightmare causes sparks of their soul's light to burn that dark seed away, preventing it from blooming into a full nightmare gate inside of them and turning them into a monster. In other words, The spell forces you to face a nightmare immediately, because if you didn't, that darkness in you could turn you into a monster or unleash a catastrophe by opening a nightmare gate in the real world. By awakening, you cleanse yourself of that initial corruption and gain immunity to its weaker effects going forward. It's a cruel cure, but a cure nonetheless. Given all of this, it's clear the nightmare spell is an engine of change for those it touches. It gives ordinary youths a crash course in survival, magical combat, and power management, turning them into something more than human. But it also places them in constant peril and stuff straight out of a horror movie. One should also note that the spell's control is pervasive. If, for some reason, an awaken is cut off from the spell's connection, they lose access to many of these benefits. Essentially, without the spell, an awakened would be flying blindly, with only their raw aspect to rely on. Thankfully, that's extremely rare. Now for the consequences on the world. The emergence of the nightmare spell utterly transformed human society. When the spell first began infecting people, it didn't announce itself with a single apocalyptic event, but rather through a series of escalating disasters. In fact, the first documented case of the nightmare spell took place off-world, on the moon, one of humanity's lunar settlements. And I remember Professor Ogle telling Sunny to not go or look at the moon. This bizarre origin or point of contact led some to speculate that the spell might have an extraterrestrial source. After all, why the moon of all places? Regardless, from that first case onward, the spell spread in waves. Teenagers on Earth and the colonies started to mysteriously fall asleep in droves. At first, each incident must have looked like a strange medical condition. But that soon began to change as survivors began to wake up, and monsters began to descend upon the world, which caught everybody unprepared. Over time, humanity adapted to this new reality. Nations adapted, some continents fell, like North America, where a Category 5 nightmare gate appeared, or Europe, which is also lost. The spell also changed the world through nightmare gates and the creatures that come with it. Because remember the Forgotten Gods' endless nightmare, in which tiny bits of it seep into reality? Yeah, over the years there have been instances where nightmare gates manifest in the real world, unleashing nightmare creatures on unsuspecting cities. And no, not from people that succumb to the nightmare. Big ass nightmare gates, like Category 5, like I've said before. These events are cataclysmic. A mysterious power like the nightmare spell naturally breeds many questions. One of the first things people wonder is, does the spell have a mind of its own? Throughout the story, we get hints that it just might. Characters have noticed eerie coincidences in how the spell operates. Another area ripe for speculation is whether or not there are any loopholes or exploits in the spell's rules. For the most part, the nightmare spell comes across as an absolute. You can't refuse it. You can't cheat it. But a few rare incidents suggest it's not entirely infallible. One extraordinary example involves Hope. During the second nightmare, Hope employed some unique rune magic of sorts that managed to cut off the nightmare spell's connection temporarily. In that brief window, the usual system features vanished. No status screens, no summoned weapons, no aspects, nothing. Essentially, they were on their own. And it raises the questions. Did Hope somehow tap into an older or alternative magic predating the spell? Or is there any way to tamper with the spell by severing spider webs of the spell? We have yet to learn about that. We also learn about defilement, a fate that can befall an awakened who succumbs utterly to darkness or corruption. Interestingly enough, even in cases of banishment or nullification, one thing seems to remain: the person's aspect. An awakened aspect is described as their own, something that exists independently of the spell's apparatus. The spell doesn't create your inner potential. It brings it out and helps you develop it. It brings out the things that you already had but did not know how to access. Basically, you have the abilities, but using them and knowing how to use them without the spell is super hard, so most people can't even do it. I think only Rain could do it. Rain and Sunny. Now, we come to one of the biggest speculations that tie into the end game of the story, one that revolves around the number of nightmares. Officially, most think that the path of ascension stops at the sixth nightmare, and no one speaks of a seventh, except the lore now heavily implies that there is a secret seventh nightmare. This would be the nightmare in which the forgotten god is bound, essentially the final dungeon housing the sleeping god. And if that's true, it means that at some point, the greatest of the awakened will have to venture onto that seventh nightmare to face the source of the corruption and the nightmare creatures. A nightmare of the gods in itself. Just imagining it raises epic stakes. You would be fighting a god. Now Sunny could brag to Yorish. The story hasn't gotten there yet, but the mere possibility of a hidden final level is thrilling to the lore. Now on a side note regarding being fateless and being severed from the spell. Sunny provides a unique case study of what it means to be cut off from the nightmare spell. In a climatic encounter, a powerful creature known as the Vile Thieving Bird in the tomb of Ariel in the estuary literally tore Sunny's fate away. Its talons pierced into Sunny's soul and severed the countless strings of destiny that bound him to the spell. As a result, Sunny's connection to the spell was completely gone. His original fated attribute vanished, and even the magical shadow bond linking him to his friend Nephis disappeared. In fact, the entire world seemed to have lost all memories of Sunny. He essentially disappeared from memory and history. Nephis no longer recognized him, because Sunny's very existence had been scrubbed off from the tapestry of destiny, therefore becoming fateless. And being fateless, well, means a person has been cut free from the tapestry of fate. Now this begs the question, are there others who do not belong to the spell? Yes. Sunny is not the only character in Shadow Slave who stands outside the influence of the nightmare spell. First off is Rain, which achieved natural awakening, like the early humans that predated the spell. Rain managed to awaken without ever being marked by the nightmare spell. She was being guided on the path of ascension by Sunny, and during a life or death trial in the dream realm, Rain succeeded in forming her soul core through sheer effort, essentially undergoing her first nightmare naturally and awakening herself. This means that Rain became an awakened without the usual spell orchestrated nightmare, a path almost unheard of in the present era. In fact, she's the only one, and she even earned a true name in the process, a distinguished feat since virtually everyone else in her era carries the nightmare spell when they wake. However, because Rain wasn't a spell carrier, she did not receive an aspect or flaw from the spell's machinery. Instead, she had to discover that on her own. And by that I mean she had to discover her true name by her own, her aspect ability by her own, and her flaw on her own. And then we have ancient heroes before the spell. Long before the nightmare spell was created, humans still became awakened, and those ancient warriors had no spell to guide them. In Sunny's second nightmare, he finds himself in an era where the nightmare spell had not been invented yet, though awakened humans and nightmare creatures, who were called the corrupted then, certainly existed. And in that nightmare, Sunny immediately noticed that he could not access his rune status or any spell-granted powers. He was essentially cut off from the spell. And there he saw various saint figures like Solvain, the priestess of war, and all of the other guardians and holders of the knife like Noctis. There were still humans that cultivated and waged war. They had mastered the art of awakening naturally. And then in his third nightmare in the tomb of Ariel, he comes face to face with an azure serpent who is actually King Daeron of the Twilight Sea. A fucking badass dude. I have to make a video on this guy. It's actually a very cool character, I very much like him. And he's a legendary sovereign with a cool ass backstory. Basically, his world was being run over by corruption and the spell, I think, and they awakened before the spell. And he managed to take in a last-ditch effort to bring all of humanity that was left in his kingdom as his sovereign into the tomb of Ariel to seek refuge. These ancient humans gained power. These legends underscore that the nightmare spell is a relatively new intervention in human destiny. Before it existed, heroes like Sylvain in Daeron had to rely on their own valor and the old gods. They were not bound by the spell, for better or worse. They had to shape their fate. And there you go, guys. That is our video on the Nightmare spell. So if you've enjoyed the video and you feel like I left anything out, feel free to mention it in the comments below. And if you liked it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time, guys.